Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of cryptid, skinwalker and wendigo stories for you to listen to. And I also want to give a big shout out to one of my original supporters, Maltese Mike. Thank you so much for being here, my dude. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I have a story that happened to my uncle. He used to tell this story when we went camping, and it scared the lights out of me every time I heard it. We live in Utah, and my uncle Mark went on a mission at 19. They sent him to the Indian reservation in Arizona, and they paired him up with a companion called Carl. When they first got there was a huge rift with the locals on the reservation with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on reservation grounds. Eventually, they came to a compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. This reservation wasn't very big and was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night they were trying to sleep when all of a sudden their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and unsure what was happening, they climbed under the table for cover. Mark could distinctly hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer, like a group of people. And after about 5 minutes, it stopped. That next day they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking the night before. The families got very quiet and told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange but tried to not think of it. The next night it happened again. They awoke to their trailer shaking back and forth and again climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights, and any time they tried to talk to anyone about it, they got quiet and told them to leave. Mark started thinking that due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them away. They then go into a convenience store and they were talking about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said that they can't talk about it. It's forbidden. Confused, they asked him, "Can't talk about what?" And the guy continued to tell them about skinwalkers. He says that they are evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, they will come for their souls. They just walked out of there baffled. They thought it was another scare tactic. So that night when the shaking started again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, threw it open and yelled, "Hey!" But when he did that, he saw these 3 animals run off. 2 appeared to be wolves, and one was as large as a bear, but they looked strange, with almost human features, and he watched them run towards the trees. All 3 of them did so standing on 2 legs, and walked slowly towards the trees, making a human cackling laugh. It scared him so badly that they called their mission president the next morning and asked to be moved. They were relocated that day, and for a year nothing happened. One day they announced that Carl was being relocated to another city, and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick Jimmy up from the airport. The road they traveled went through the boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at around 8 p.m. and met Jimmy and went to leave. The mission president told Jimmy that while they were driving through the area it might be dangerous, so to not make any stops, and that if he needed to use the restroom, to go now. Jimmy replies saying he was fine. The mission president gets serious enough to even freak out Mark, and with that they hit the road. As they were around half hour into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries, and Jimmy starts complaining that he needs to pee, badly. The mission president insists that they couldn't stop here and that he will need to hold it. Jimmy insistent he can't hold it, so the mission president reluctantly stops the car and impresses upon him the seriousness of being quick. With a look of confusion, Jimmy just says, "All right," opens the door and starts peeing. About 5 seconds later, the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark start freaking out and ask what's going on, but the mission president says nothing and just increases his speed. That's when all of a sudden Mark sees something next to the car on his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer. They were going over 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept right next to the car for 10 minutes until they finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car when they arrive. They didn't speak through the whole ordeal and says, "What did I just see?" The mission president just says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business." I was driving from Atlanta, Georgia to Lexington, South Carolina with my girlfriend to visit parents. I like to drive at night since there are less people on the road and I can take my time. At around 3 a.m. or so, we're making good time. I had stopped at a gas station and picked up some coffee for us, and we were due in about an hour. My girlfriend was sleeping soundly, and I'm listening to a quiet radio humming away. I start getting a little drowsy and take a sip. The road had no cars in sight except for a few spotted on the side of the road here and there. In the distance I can make out what looks like a hitchhiker, or what I think is one, but I can't really tell due to such low light. As I get closer, I start to notice other things, like how the person is kinda thin and tall, and completely, for the most part, apparently brown. I'm right on this thing now, and about 20 feet from it, it turns around and locks eyes with me as I pass by. This was no person. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. It was a deer, or I tell myself it was. I've seen deer stand on their hind legs to fight, but they still have deer posture when they do so. Not only that, but I was watching this thing walk for about 30 seconds from first seeing it in the distance to passing it. The posture it had was human, standard biped stance, arms back, chin down. But the worst part were the eyes, or lack thereof, as in place were 2 large black pits, almost black hole-ish. I'll never forget the stare down it gave me. The instant I passed it, I had the only panic attack I've ever had in my life. I had to wake up my girlfriend to keep me calm enough to get to an exit, with a large gas station a few miles away. Like hell I was going to use an off-ramp, that close to that thing. After we pulled into the gas station, I had a complete meltdown and cried harder than I ever thought I could. I couldn't talk, breathe, or do anything but want to curl into a ball and cry. After around 30 minutes or so, she finally gets me to calm down enough to tell her what happened. While I don't think she believed what I think I saw, she knew that I was convinced and legitimately scared to death. Every once in a blue moon I'll dream about it and wake up crying or in a cold sweat, and she will tease me about it or roll over and ignore me instead of comforting me about the one thing that I've ever been terrified of. But I know what I saw, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. To start off this story, I need to give you a little insight about myself. I'm an 18-year-old female who grew up in Michigan and have lived in the country for as long as I can remember. On this particular hot summer weekend, my friends and I, including my boyfriend Tony and my older brother Brad, decided we were going to go camping for the weekend, as it was such a nice warm week. Tony's parents owned a cabin way out in Ludington, surrounded by a huge wooded area with a personal lake and no neighbors for at least 4 miles. But being stupid teenagers, we really didn't think about that. All we were ready for was to party like any normal teens. And after being there for 2 hours, our fun had started. Tony's friends had bought tons of alcohol and weed for us to have at the weekend, so we wouldn't be bored as we had no service and only movies to watch. After it got around midnight, it was pitch black, and we had this huge bonfire going. It was a total of 6 people, including me and Tony, and as we talked and laughed about upcoming events in our lives, We were so distracted that we didn't notice that my brother had literally frozen his eyes into one section of the woods. Mind you, we were all quite intoxicated and high at the time. Eventually our talking ceased when Tony realized his friend and my brother had an emotionless expression. He asked Brad how he was, but Brad didn't reply or make any indication that he had heard him. After that, me and my two girlfriends began to get scared as well. It took a lot for my brother to act that way. Eventually, I was the first one to catch on that he was excessively staring into a certain spot in the woods, and I turned my head and followed his gaze as best I could. And when I finally caught on to what he was looking at, my heart dropped. Right there was a dog. At least that's what I thought. It was some person's dog that wandered off. But then my brain kicked in, and I realized that there weren't neighbors for many miles. It was very unlikely for there to be a dog. My mind began to race, while Tony still tried to get Brad to speak or even move. In one motion, this thing got off its 4 legs and stood up on 2. That was not something we were expecting. And when it did so, it was gigantic. It had to be at least 6 feet tall. I kid you not. The other 2 girls and the other boy with us audibly gasped as they finally grasped why my brother was as still as a stick. No one moved for what seemed like hours, but was probably mere seconds. Tony was the first to talk. Doesn't have a tail. No one heard what he said but Brad, and I swear to you, when I say his eyes were as big as saucepans. That freaked me out immediately. What did you say? One of the girls asked. It has no tail. My heart stopped beating. He was right. It didn't have a tail. Suddenly my clouded alcohol mind cleared up in a fraction of a second when I finally realized what this thing was. Now I understood why my brother was basically crapping himself. Could it be a skinwalker? My instincts kicked in right there, but before I could nope out of there, the thing let off a terrible stench like rotting meat. The sound was enough to scare the hell out of everyone. My brother, who was the first up out of his chair, and started shouting native words to the creature when I told him to just get the hell inside. No one questioned me when they saw how dead serious I was, especially Tony. He's never seen me so scared, so he knew we were in a bad situation. We all fled from the cabin, with my brother in tow, shouting native words at the creature, which seemed to keep it at bay, giving us enough time to get inside. He slammed and locked the door before turning all the lights off and grabbing a special ash from the kitchen counter and started throwing it at every window and door while chanting. Of course, he had freaked everyone out, and we were all in tears. After he was done, no one said a word for a long time. Many of us were in shock. He grabbed my dad's pistol and was holding onto it for hours. We must have all eventually fallen asleep, and we were all very shaken up. I awoke to my brother packing all our stuff into the 2 cars early in the morning. I understood why. We had native family. We knew what we were dealing with, and we knew it would come back, and maybe not alone. Before we did, I did a blessing on the cabin and spoke a few calming words to the still very freaked out girls. We left as soon as everything was packed up, and to this day we still haven't explained exactly to our friends what happened that night, and they don't bother asking us either. I haven't really shared this story with many people, but I thought it might be time. This happened back in the 90s. I was driving from Ohio to California and stopped finally for some sleep at a rest stop in Flagstaff, Arizona. I am known to drive long distances with little sleep, and woke up and headed to California. It was early in the morning, around 4 a.m. California time, and I was between Needles and Barstow, out in the middle of nowhere in the Mojave Desert. And that's when I saw what I swear to this day was a huge wolf the size of a person run across the road in front of me. It was on all fours, and the back of it was above the hood of my car easily, a Chevy Cavalier, and roughly 12 feet ahead of me. I hit the brakes lightly, as I was the only car around at the time, and it went from north to south. Over 20 years ago, and still clear as day, though it was dark. Now I've seen coyotes and lived in the desert for some time, and have never seen anything like this before or since. It was grey in colour, mostly, and resembled a werewolf in size, but I don't believe in those generally speaking. And out of all my 20+ trips, I've seen snowstorms, tornadoes, dust storms, and other things I'll never forget. But this is one of those things. Anyone out in that area ever seen anything like this? It still drives me crazy trying to figure out what the hell it was, and I do speculate often enough about it. This happened back when I was living in Needville, Texas. I left my mum's house to go feed our dogs that were living at my grandma's house. She had space for them, so they stayed there, and we lived a few miles down the street. This was a little after the 2008 crash, and we had lost our home back in South Carolina like most people had, so we had moved to a smaller rental property in the middle of pretty much nowhere. Needville is a tiny farm town with maybe 300 people at most. Anyway, it was a hot, muggy summer evening, and I headed over to go see my grandma and chit-chat for a bit. I fed the dogs and hung out with my grandma for a few hours. It got dark out, and I decided that I should head back home. So I got back in my car and drove back home. When I started pulling up on my mum's house though, I see a large, squatting shape in the driveway like a gorilla. I start to enter the driveway slowly, and as soon as my tires hit the gravel, it immediately whips around to face me. And right there, lit up in my headlights, is this hulking creature about the same size and build as a gorilla but covered in thick, silver fur, and it had huge, bulbous, ruby-red chitinous eyes and a gruesome snarling mouth full of sharp teeth that looked like they were a good 2 to 3 inches long. It had a small forehead and a round head that was about the same size as a human head, covered in the same thick silver fur. In the moment that it heard my tires hit the gravel, it turned, snarled, and bared its teeth at my car for a brief second, then immediately turned towards the bushes on the other side of the yard and kicked off with its feet, exactly like a gorilla. It looped off into the bushes, alternatively swinging on its hands and landing on its feet, and then vanished. I pulled into my mum's driveway and just waited in the car for a minute to let that thing hopefully run off before I bolted into the house. As soon as the light on the front porch came on and my sister poked her head out to see why I wasn't inside yet, I launched my happy ass right out of the car and full-on sprinted to the door. I didn't see that creature ever again after that, but that didn't stop me from being vigilant for a few months after. This story happened to me and my friends. To set the scene, we were on a Boy Scout camping/shooting trip. There were between 20 to 30 of us, and we were in a little cabin thing with windows on the front and back, and a front and back door. There were wooden tables all around the area. The adult cabin, with the bathroom, was about 1/8 of a mile down a gravel road in the dark. There was obviously a buddy system because it's Boy Scouts. So it's around midnight, and everyone had been telling scary stories like normal camping trips. Well, I had to go to the bathroom and ask my friend to come along. He obliged, and we got our knives as we knew there were bears in the woods and it made us feel safer. We went to the bathroom, did our business, and began walking back. This is where it got scary. I felt an instinctual fear. I looked to my friend, and he has the same look as me. We begin to walk a little faster and unfold our pocket knives. I then turn around and see it. It looked similar to a cat but was 6 feet tall and on its hind legs, kinda hunched over. I freaked the heck out and started running. My friend sees it too, and we sprint back to the cabin. It began making a moaning/howling noise, and it was somewhere between the two, and followed us slowly. We pound on the door and the guys let us in. We tell them what we saw and they actually believe us, so we lock the front door, but when we went to do it to the back, it had no lock. We pushed a table up against it, and had a kid there with his knife for safety. We draw the blinds on all the windows that had them, one of them didn't, and sat there with all the lights on. That's when we see eyes outside the window without blinds. We're all crapping ourselves, and the thing slowly walked back to the back door. We heard it bump against it, perhaps it was trying to open it, but left when it failed. That night, we thought we were going to die, and no one slept. When the adults came to wake us, we told them and they laughed and said that we were making it up. But we knew it happened, even though they didn't believe us. Many years ago, I had an encounter with a Wendigo. I'm part Cherokee, and had heard about these monsters before. It was late at night. I was a teenager, and I lived with my family. We had a few dogs and they needed to go outside before bed. One of the dogs would only go in our backyard. One of my family members opened the back door, and at that moment the dog became instantly aggressive. This is a dog that had never shown aggression before or after this night. Just as fast as she became aggressive, she became scared and ran back inside. I had just kicked my boots off after wearing them all day, and was about to get changed out of my jeans when this happened. I quickly put my boots back on and grabbed a flashlight and a large club that I had recently made. I booked it out to the back of our house, and just stopped dead in my tracks. I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything, but something was there. I could feel a dark presence, if that makes sense. Then I see a shadow. It's huge and moving, easily 8 feet tall, vaguely humanoid, but had these massive antlers. Normally my flashlight is able to illuminate everything pretty well, but tonight I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. It was like the light was going into a void. My eyes adjusted to the low light, and I stand there for what seemed like an eternity as I watch the figure search a workbench before it stops. The figure looks straight forward before turning to face me, to reveal glowing red eyes. The figure and I stare at each other for what must have been just a moment, but felt like eons. I know that showing fear in the situation was only going to get me killed, but for some reason I lifted the club and pointed it at the figure. The figure curiously looked at the club and back into my eyes, before slowly nodding its head up and down. I see my flashlight turn off in my peripheral vision. I look at it, and it turns back on, this time illuminating the entirety of the property. I quickly turn my focus back to the figure, but it was gone. What was lifetimes to me was no more than a minute in reality, and I wonder what it all means, if anything. I realize how unbelievable this story might be, but I assure you it's entirely true. I've had countless experiences with the supernatural since I was 4, and I'm 33 now. But this is one of the most terrifying ones I've ever had. I had an experience with what I believe to be a Wendigo this fall in early October in northern Minnesota in a state forest, very close to, if not on, a reservation. I've always heard that speaking to them can draw them to you, but I hadn't thought of or listened to any Wendigo stories anytime close to my encounter. I was staying with some very dear friends, Mary and Carol, and they have a camper in their yard by the lake for guests to sleep in. I had walked down to the camper from the house with my miniature dachshund, Ebony, around midnight, and found that I needed to set some things up, primarily the heater. By the time I was done getting everything in order, it was about 1:30 a.m. I never thought to lock the door because really I figured I'm in the middle of the woods, so there was nothing to worry about. but I was wrong. I had to close the curtains, and I was having trouble falling asleep because my anxiety was going mad. Mary and Carol's dogs were barking outside, and their geese wouldn't stop honking. Ebony, who usually sleeps under the covers, was sitting on my hip while I laid on my side, and I could feel her turning her head back and forth like she was trying to track something outside. I tried tucking her under the blankets to calm her down, but she kept returning to her perch on my hip. I have no idea how long I laid there, perhaps 40 minutes, when all of a sudden I heard Mary's voice outside the camper. "Anyone in there?" And then I heard a sound that sounded like claws dragged down the side of the camper. I almost called back when I realized that number one, she and Carol were both asleep by now, and two, Mary knew I was there. She wouldn't ask if anybody was there. That's when I noticed everything had gone absolutely silent outside. The dogs and the birds had stopped carrying on. The gusts of wind had even stopped. It was the kind of silence you hear about in horror stories, how the woods go mute when something evil is in the area. Then another thought hit me. Ebony would be losing her mind and barking at the door if it had been anything human. She was frozen on my hip, dead quiet and shaking. I dare not move, but I was really starting to have to pee, and I remembered that I hadn't locked the door. I have no idea how long I laid there, debating whether if I should get up to use the restroom and lock the door, but it felt like an eternity. In reality, I guessed it was maybe 10 to 15 minutes. I thought it may have been a skinwalker at first, but remembered they don't mimic the voices of your loved ones to lure you out into the woods. Wendigos, however, do. I knew these creatures, demons, whatever they are, can lure humans out of their abodes, and if they make contact with you, and everything was screaming in me to make sure I didn't look outside. I made doubly sure I didn't look through any cracks in the curtains as I walked softly to the front of the camper and very slowly turned the lock, praying and holding my breath. I made sure to keep my eyes away from the windows as I crawled back in bed and pulled Ebony close as she finally stayed under the blankets. I snuck a peek at my phone for the first time before I laid down. Figured it had to be close to 3 a.m. It was 2:30. As soon as I laid down, the wind kicked back up, and Mary and Carol's basset hounds erupted into howls, and they came running down to the camper, and a little way away into the trees, the geese started their noise again. I heard the bassets come down to the camper, barking a few more times before they laid down outside the door, as if to protect me. I didn't get out of bed that night. I told Mary and Carol what happened the next morning. I think I was hoping Mary would say she had come down to check on me and Ebony, but she confirmed what I already knew. They had gone to bed as soon as I had left the house. I said a prayer over their house, the camper, and all of us the following night, and had an uneventful night, thank God. I also spoke to another guy who's familiar with the supernatural to see if he knew any more about Wendigos. I'm not sure how accurate the information he gave me was, or if it's reliable at all, but when I asked him why Ebony hadn't made a peep, I had assumed it was because she was absolutely petrified. He said Wendigos can control the animals to keep them from alerting their owners of its presence. He also told me that they can't enter the house that aren't made of wood directly from the forest they're hunting in, tents and campers included, because they consist of man-made materials. A lock is useless. They can unlock and open a door so they can try and lure you out, and they typically stay in the woods, but they will come into a smaller town and never into a city. I had never heard any of the things he told me before, so again I can't speak for the accuracy, but I also haven't researched their claims either. He also advised me to never go outside to pee at night. If I ever go camping, bring a bucket or something and to make sure I always close the tent flaps and curtains before falling asleep. He said if the flaps are open and you can see outside, it might make eye contact with you, and thus draw you out. After leaving Mary and Carol to go to my father's house for a few days, I had the distinct feeling of being watched when I took Ebony outside after dark. My father lives 3 hours away from Mary and Carol, but his house is in the country. I told myself it was only the fear of the experience and what I know about the Wendigo triggering an overactive imagination. I never heard anything, and I watched Ebony's behavior very closely, and she didn't act like she had in the camper. I'm moving back from that area from Canada, and this experience has been weighing heavily on my mind. I have been trying to find any information about warding them off, or if they have a home hunting range like cougars do, or if they can move on from a region. My prayers did work the second night, so I figure I can just pray over the property. I also have holy water that I can use, and as it's an evil creature that possesses people or physically manifests, I would hope it would work. Frustratingly, a majority of what comes up in searches is utter garbage. Does anyone know if they stay in one area? Are my concerns about it coming back when I get moved into my cabin warranted? Or am I worrying excessively? Does anyone have any tips for warding them off? It would be greatly appreciated. I'm 50 years old now, but this happened to me when I was about 18, in the 80s. Me and a couple of my other friends owned this huge bar with 3 levels of floors, and I would always have my own DJ booth in the whole bar. Anyway, the bar would open at 9 at night during this time, and didn't end until 2 or 3 the next morning. I love nature, and down in Alabama, especially where I lived, there was a bunch and lots of woods, so I would always walk home after the party was over. It was one particular night that I'll never forget. It was like any other usual night. I was playing, the party would start at 9, end at 2, and after the security guards would start clearing the place, which would be full of people, I remember packing up and getting ready to go home. I would always get offers from my friends or even females I met at the night at the bar if I needed a ride home, since I rarely drove to the bar because, like I said, I really love to walk, especially at night, hearing the late night bugs, water flowing from the stream, and even the bobcats snarl at night. As always, I thought I would decline their offers, but would give them thanks. Tonight, I did just that, and was on my way home. I would always take this route. I still remember it to this day. It was a long street passing both sides of the woods. I can't remember what the woods are called, but for probably any ordinary person, these types of woods would scare the crap out of them even during the day. This detail is just to give you a picture of how they are. Yes, during the day they are creepy, but at night I think they're like something out of a horror film like Jason or something. But I remember walking like usual, and I knew this route extremely well, and that it would be 15 minutes from me turning onto another street, which is where the woods would end on one side and would lead me straight to my house. During my walk, I hear this rustling. I'm walking on the left side of the street, and the rustling is coming from the opposite. Now, I was no stranger to the rustling. It wasn't the ordinary sound of no snake slithering or no bobcat moving around. No. These movements were much heavier. The sound was more just like rustling, as if you were rubbing your hands across leaves or wind blowing the trees. But the thing was in the air still. As I'm walking, I'm analyzing the sound. Half of me is saying, it has to be a human presence, when the other half is on edge. As I'm walking, the sound gets closer. It's as if whatever it is approaching me. As the sound gets to a certain point, I start to turn my gaze that way, and I kid you not, whatever this thing is, had the trees moving like they were on the verge of falling over. I was kind of scared crapless at this point, and tried to pick up my pace, but as I take one more gaze back at the sound, I see it. This is what I would describe as even a fearless man's worst nightmare. I stopped in my tracks when I see it. Right now, across the street from me, were a pair of two red glowing eyes, and as I start to analyze more, I see the thing is standing at least 10 feet tall. That's when I noticed its legs. They were more like tentacles. I stared at it for a few seconds and then absolutely bolted. My mind was going haywire, and I ran and I ran and I ran until I found the first house and started banging on the door. It took a few minutes before a man came to the door. Clearly I had just woken him, as it was around 3 to 4 a.m. at this point. I begged for help, and he told me to go in and sit down on the couch while I tried to explain to him that I had just witnessed a terrifying creature. He instructed me to get into his truck and that we would go and check it out. He went and grabbed his shotgun and we drove over to the spot in the woods where I had seen the creature, which of course was now gone. He seemed somewhat interested but disbelieving in my story, and after explaining that this had been exactly where it was, us looking around and finding nothing, he drove me back. It was on the way back that he mentioned that some of his farm animals had died lately under very strange circumstances. He dropped me off to my house, which wasn't far away, and left some parting advice for me, that I should stay out of the woods at night. I obliged him and haven't been back since. There's no way I want to meet the creature that haunts my nightmares again. This happened in Pennsylvania, in the Allegheny National Forest in 2009. It was when the National Rainbow Gathering was there, and I was hitchhiking the East Coast at the time, and I made my way there. I ran into a buddy I had met in Florida a few months before, and she was there with a friend, so they adopted me and I camped with them. Me and Anna decided to camp alongside the main trail to get away from all the thousands of hippies. The main trail goes from a camp, the parking lot, to the main circle in the heart of the gathering, and it's a few miles of trekking, so we were just there alone besides the main trail traffic. It was dusk, and we were having a heavy talk about spirituality and whatnot, when we decided to go down to the main circle to get some food. We were standing up and I began to stomp out the little twig fire we had when Anna said, "Do you hear that?" I stopped and listened. It sounded like someone was walking in the forest towards us. At this same moment, some people on the main trail had stopped and were smoking cigarettes and were talking amongst themselves, oblivious to us. Me and Anna listened to those footsteps quickly moving into view, but we could see nothing. The footsteps kept going, and there was nothing there. My mind was misfiring, trying to figure out what the hell that was. We could actually see the footfalls of twigs snapping and leaves moving. Whatever it was, went right up to the people on the trail and seemed to slow its pace like it was checking them out. They were totally oblivious to this, talking to each other in a circle. Then it just came right up to me and Anna and slowed down like it was checking us out. I wasn't scared, just confused and frozen to the spot. The entire time, Anna was fumbling with a keychain. She had millions of things attached to it, and finally found this little flashlight and shone it and said, "Hey." Whatever this thing was feet away from me, and it bounded up the hill very fast. If I had wanted to run after it, I couldn't have. It was really fast, and Anna and myself took off down the hill totally spooked. To me it sounded like a child speed walking, if that makes sense. The steps were short but almost robotically fast. This really happened, and Anna would refuse to talk about it after. She was totally freaked. I had to go back up and pack up the camp. I really wish I knew what that was.